Can you guys see me okay? Am I all right? It looks okay. Yeah, it looks fine. Blessings to you all. Here we are, another Shabbat. I'm excited. I don't know why, but I'm excited. And like I say every week, after a long day of working, after a long week of working, Shabbat has finally come. And so we bless Yah for us being here. We bless Yah for everyone who's watching and going to watch. We bless Yah for His word. One of the things that I was considering earlier today was, I believe my friend Pat asked me, how is it that in the Bible we see Yahweh is manifesting in fire and manifesting in the storms, but now He seems to have been converted to a God that dwells in our hearts, a God of more of knowledge than, we don't see manifestations of fire anymore. And that's because the men of old who were writing the Tanakh, they wanted to captivate their audience. They couldn't just say, well, Yahweh told me this, and this. They had to make Yahweh glorious. So in their intentions or in their attempt to give more glory to Yahweh, they exaggerated his characteristics, and so Yahweh goes from being who He really is to this great storm God, to a God of fire and all of these things, because the people who were writing had to appeal to the primitive mindset of the people that they were speaking with. And so my topic for today is going to be the reforms of Josiah. Now, the reforms of Josiah, this is something that in Christian circles you don't really hear about. But there are things that we should take notice of. I'm actually going to point you. Blessings to you. I'm going to point you to two texts because it's in two texts. So we're going to go to 2 Kings. 2 Kings 22. Blessings, Andre. Because he's gonna get me. Andre, I don't know what made me say Andre anyway. So blessings to you, Andre.
2 Kings what?
We're going to 2 Kings 22. He says Andre. Okay, I understand, Andrew. 2 Kings 22. Okay. And I'll be skipping some verses. So I'm going to do verse 1 and 2. It says, Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Jedidah, the daughter of Adiah of Baskat. And he did that which was right in the sight of Yahweh, and walked in all the ways of David his father, and did not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. Verse 3, and it came to pass in the 18th year of King Josiah that the king sent Shaphan, the son of Azaliah, the son of Mashullam, the scribe, to the house of Yahweh, saying, Go up to Hilkiah the high priest, that he may sum the silver which is brought into the house of Yahweh, which the keepers of the doors have gathered of the people. One thing that I want to notice here. Shalom, Matthias, brother Matthias. It's good to see you. We're glad to have you here. One of the things that I noticed right off the bat with this text in 2 Kings 22 is that the gatekeepers are the ones who are collecting the money at the door. There's no collection plate going around, y'all. This is done at the door. And so that to me is significant. It lets us know that, some of the things that we practice are not quite biblical. Skip to verse 8. 2 Kings 22 and verse 8. It says, And Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the scribe, I have found the book of the Torah in the house of Yahweh. And Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan, and he read it. I'm going to try to go slow because I think I heard that somebody's translating. So I'm going to have mercy on you. I know what it's like to have to translate, and somebody's going extremely fast. Yeah, I know. So I'm going to have mercy on you. Let's see. Verse 9. And Shaphan the scribe came to the king and brought the king word again and said, Your servants have gathered the money that was found in the house and have delivered it into the hand of them that do the work, that have the oversight of the house of Yahweh. And Shaphan the scribe showed the king, saying, Hilkiah the priest has delivered a book to me, and read it before the king. And it came to pass when the king had heard the words of the book of the Torah, that he rent his clothes. He ripped his clothes. And the king commanded Hilkiah the priest, the son of Shaphan, and Abhor, the son of Micaiah, and Shaphan the scribe, and Asaiah the servant of the kings, saying, Go, inquire of Yahweh for me, and for the people, and for all Judah concerning the words of this book that is found, for great is the word of Yahweh. So into office, and he knows that the temple is in ruins. And so he says, get the, they've been collecting money all of this time. Take the money. Um, it says that the connection is unstable.
Oh, I thought it was just me. But is it showing that it's recording?
Yeah, it's still recording.
Probably not gonna show until after it's done.
Okay, so I'm gonna keep going, and I know you guys are gonna see it afterwards. I'm sorry for the connection issues. Um, but King Josiah was a child when he came into the kingship, when he began to reign, and according to the scripture. And while he was reigning, he noticed that the house of Yahweh was in destruction. It was in ruins, and so he ordered the money that was collected to be used toward repairing the house. And so while the repairs were being done, the Torah was found. The book of the law was found. And at the end of the book, there's always going to be blessings and curses. And so he found the blessings and the curses. Now I want us to go to 2 Kings 23. And we're going to go to verse 1. And the king sent, and they gathered unto him all the elders of Judah and of Jerusalem. And the king went up into the house of Yahweh, and all the men of Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem with him, and the priests and the prophets, and all the people, both great, small and great. And he read in their ears all the words of the book of the covenant, which was found in the house of Yahweh. Listen, this is important. What was the book that was found in the house of Yahweh? What was the book that was found in the house of Yahweh? What was the book that was found in the house of Yahweh? In chapter 22, it says the book of the law or the book of the Torah. But here in verse 20, in chapter 23 and verse 2, it says the book of the covenant. The book of the covenant. So, where is this book of the covenant? Let's go to Exodus chapter 24. Exodus chapter 24. Exodus chapter 24. Exodus chapter 4. And we're going to start at verse 3. Blessings, Aishu. Blessings to you in India and to your household. Exodus chapter 4 and verse 3. It says, and Moses came and told the people the words of Yahweh and all the judgments. Pause. Okay, so where are the judgments? Where are the judgments? In order to know what these judgments are, you have to go back to Exodus chapter 21. It says in verse 1, Exodus 21 and verse 1, now these are the judgments which you shall set before them. So, starting from chapter 21, going all the way to chapter 23, these are the judgments. So let's go back to Exodus chapter 23. Let me know if you guys are not following. If I need to slow down or explain something again, let me know. So let's go back to Exodus chapter 24. Go back to verse 3 and read again. And Moses came and told the people all the words of Yahweh and all the judgments. So the words of Yahweh is referring to what we call the Ten Commandments, what's referred as the Ten Commandments. So that means Exodus chapter 20 and then Exodus chapter 21 all the way to chapter 24 is the judgment. So reading verse 3 again, and Moses came and told the people all the words of Yahweh and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which Yahweh has said, we will do. And Moses wrote all the words of Yahweh, speaking of the Ten Commandments, and rose up early in the morning, and speaking of the Ten Commandments and the judgments, and rose up early in the morning and built an altar under the hill, and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the children of Israel, which offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen unto Yahweh. Pause. There's a lot in that verse. First of all, he sent young men of the children of Israel to offer burnt offerings. There was no priesthood. These are regular men who are sacrificing. And what are they sacrificing? Burnt offerings and peace offerings. Burnt offerings and peace offerings are a sign, hello, are a sign of the El tradition. How do you know that? Because archaeology has found in the city of Ugrit, manuscripts of the worship of the Canaanite deity El. So, just so you guys understand, the worship of El, remember El is distinct from Yahweh. The worship of El comes from Syria, Mesopotamia. Okay, these are Aramaic speaking um, Aramaic speaking areas. So the worship of El is a Syrian Mesopotamian Canaanite deity. And in these notes that they found in the city called Ugarit, they found the offerings in detail, specifically the burnt offering, the peace offering, the trespass offering, the tithe is also there, and so these are traditions or rituals that originate from the El tradition. Okay, so now we know what tradition this is that's being talked about, because and then you'll notice that the El tradition has no priesthood. Okay, that's very important. The El tradition does not have a priesthood. So young men from the tribes are giving sacrifices to El, but it's in the name of Yahweh, which lets us know that either this is the El tradition or this is the Zedekite tradition, the priestly source that's writing here. But let's go on. Verse 6, and Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant. So now we understand that the book of the covenant is the Ten Commandments, is also the judgments from Exodus 21 to 24, and possibly it may even be the sacrificial laws, Leviticus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, possibly 8, and 9. So the book of the covenant that Josiah found was Exodus 20 to 24. We know that for sure, Exodus 20 to 24. All right, so now I got to go back and find Josiah, y'all. We're in 2 Kings. Let's go back to 2 Kings and 23. So Josiah in verse 2 says that he read in their ears all the words of the book of the covenant, which was found in the house of Yahweh. And the king, verse 3, and the king stood by a pillar and made a covenant before Yahweh. What were the details of that covenant? To walk after walk after Yahweh, to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all their heart and all their soul, to perform the words of this covenant that was written in this book. And all the people stood to the covenant. So, listen to the details of the covenant: to walk after Yahweh, to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all their heart and all their soul, and to perform the words of this covenant. It sounds like the book of Deuteronomy. When you go through the introduction of the book of Deuteronomy, it uses these language: the commandments, the testimonies, the statutes, the judgments. It's very specific like that. It doesn't just say the law. It doesn't just cover it in just one word. It has to say the commandments, the testimonies, the statutes, and the judgments. Okay? And the ordinances. So the covenant that was made by King Josiah is written in the book of Deuteronomy. And this is why the book of Deuteronomy seems to uh, repeat so much, because they're reaffirming a covenant that they had already made, that the ancestors had already made. Okay, and so let's see what else happens. Verse 4: And the king commanded Hilkiah the high priest, and the priests of the second order, and the keepers of the door, to bring forth out of the temple of Yahweh all the vessels that were made for Baal, and for the grove, and for all the host of heaven. So what's going on here? Look at this, you guys. Inside the temple, when Josiah was king, inside the temple were idols, vessels that were used for the worship of other gods, and images for the hosts of heaven, meaning the sun, the moon, Jupiter, all of these planets. What did they do? They carried the ashes to Bethel. Verse 5: And he put down the idolatrous priests, whom the kings of Judah had ordained to burn incense in the high places, in the cities of Judah, and in the places around about Jerusalem. Them also that burned incense unto Baal, to the sun, and to the moon, and to the planets, and to all the host of heaven. So what's going on? So the first theme that we see in the book of Deuteronomy is the obedience to the statutes, the commandments, the testimonies, the ordinances. You see that specific language, okay? So it's the first focus, or the first emphasis, is on the obedience to the commandments. Okay, to obedience, listen to this, to the obedience of specifically what's written in Exodus, from Exodus chapter 20 to Exodus chapter 24. Okay, which is why when you look in the book of Deuteronomy, you can see that the same commandments that were spoken in Exodus 24 through 21 through 24 are again repeated, and sometimes in greater detail. Even in some texts in Leviticus, they also come from that covenant. For instance, the the I'm sorry, I lost it. For instance, I forgot already. In Leviticus chapter 25, it talks about the Sabbath year. Now, the Sabbath year and the year of Jubilee. So those things are specifically spoken about in the book of Deuteronomy, because it's going back to uh, the book of Exodus, and it's explaining it in more detail sometimes. So the second emphasis that we see is the breaking down of the idols, and the breaking down of the altars. In Deuteronomy, it specifically says that you are to, when you come into that land, when you come to the place where Yahweh wants you to inhabit in Canaan, you are to break down the altars. And so what happens is Josiah, who was making this covenant, makes it seem as if Yahweh spoke to Moses and commanded Moses that the altars be broken and that the idols be destroyed. And so he's making the point that this needs to be done. This is a commandment from Moses. Now, understand, Moses did not write this. Okay, I'm sorry if you believe that Moses wrote it. I'm sorry that you're of a different opinion. But Moses did not write this. But what a lot of people did, they wrote, and then to make their writing authoritative to give authority to their writing, they will say Moses wrote it. Oh, Aaron did it. Aaron said this, so we have to do it. Moses said it, so we have to do it. Okay? And so in chapter 23, they're breaking down the altars. And they're taking out all of the idolatry and removing all of the idolatrous priests. Um, Now listen to this. 2 Kings 23 and 13. It says, while it's talking about them breaking down the altars, it says, and the high places that were before Jerusalem, which were on the right hand of the Mount of Corruption, which Solomon, the king of Israel, had built to Ashtoreth, the abomination of the Zidonians, and for Hamosh, the abomination of the Moabites, and for Milcom, the abomination of the children of Ammon, did the king defile. So wait a minute now. We were under the impression that Solomon built a great and grand temple for Yahweh. But here it tells us that Solomon also put idols in the temple. So there were also idols inside the temple. And this is the reason why Ezekiel, when Ezekiel writes in Ezekiel chapter 8, he goes into specifics about how the Spirit of Yahweh brought him into the temple and he saw the idols. He saw the writings on the wall. He saw the elders worshiping Tammuz. He goes into this very detailed description of what he saw inside the temple. Josiah sets himself to break down these altars and to break down these idols and to break down these idolatrous things. He also goes into the high places. Now, when you get to Deuteronomy chapter 12, there is a focus that is not found before. And that focus is that there is one place to worship. Only one place. There are no altars being built in different places in different cities. If you're too far away, then you still have to come to the one place. That one place is Jerusalem. Now, Josiah doesn't say that in Deuteronomy chapter 12. He says the place where Yahweh chooses to put his name. And how do we know that Jerusalem is that place? Well, when you go to Second Chronicles and to First Kings, you see that Solomon is praying, and then Yahweh says, "I choose to put my name in Jerusalem." Why is that? Why is that? Because that correlation has to be there, because the same person who wrote the book of Deuteronomy is the same person who wrote the histories. They're called the Deuteronomy histories in scholarship. And so they want you to make that correlation. Yahweh said that we're only supposed to worship in the place where he puts his name. And then in First Kings and in Second Chronicles, it says that Yahweh decides to put his name in the temple that's at Jerusalem. So everybody in Israel is supposed to go to the temple in Jerusalem. Then in verse 23, chapter 23 and verse 23 of 2 Kings 23, verse 23, Josiah holds the Passover. He kills the familiar the people who were working with familiar spirits. He kills the wizards. He kills the idol worshippers so that he can celebrate the Passover. No king had ever celebrated the Passover like Josiah celebrated the Passover.
So was he cleaning the unleavened bread?
He was cleansing he was taking the leaven out of the temple. And so when you hear me say, oh, the Yahweh tradition, oh, the El tradition, the Yahweh alone, the Deuteronomy tradition. The way that you know of these traditions is because um, of the similar language that's used. For instance, when you read in the Torah, you read, I am Yahweh who sanctifies you. I am Yahweh who led you out of the land of Israel to be your God. But when you read the book of Ezekiel, you can see that same language. I am Yahweh who sanctifies you. I am Yahweh who led you out of Egypt to be your God. So you know that Ezekiel wrote parts of Exodus, parts of the Torah. You just gotta, you know, cut and paste in a few places.
Hey, Thomas Jefferson.
So it's very important that you guys understand how I can say to you, well, the Yahweh tradition, the Elohim tradition, the Deuteronomy tradition, because they sound similar. They have what are called literary signatures. Okay? And so when you hear me say, oh, the Yahweh tradition, well, how do you know? Because it says this phrase. So there's a strong emphasis in the reforms of Josiah to do away with the idolatry. Now, one of the things that you do not see is sacrifices. That's interesting. You don't see sacrifices in the book of Deuteronomy. Why? Let me explain to you why. Let's go to Jeremiah chapter 7. Jeremiah chapter 7. Jeremiah chapter 7. And 7 times 3 is 21. So we'll be going to Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 21. Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 21.
21?
Yep, Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 21. Thus says Yahweh of hosts. Remember that phrase, Yahweh of hosts. Then remember the God of Israel. Now, one of the things that you see in the Deuteronomy text is that Yahweh is the God of Israel. That's interesting. Yahweh is the God of Israel. Yahweh is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he's the God of the fathers. This shows us that Yahweh had already been merged with El, because El is the God of the fathers. El is the God of Israel. Hello. El is the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When you read the text, you can plainly see that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are worshiping El, especially in Genesis. But okay, so then he says, put your burnt offerings into your sacrifices and eat flesh. Because I did not speak to your fathers, nor command them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning burnt offerings or sacrifices. So wait a minute. In verse 22, Yahweh tells Jeremiah, I didn't tell the people of Israel to sacrifice. I didn't tell them to do sacrifices.
Contradictory, huh? 21 to 22.
So, well, let me explain. 21 is telling them, you know how we say, take your offering and shove it.
Okay.
Is what he's saying. Put your burnt offerings unto your sacrifices and eat flesh. So what is he really saying? He's saying the people who sacrifice are the ones who eat. He's saying that clearly because you can imagine that the people thought that these idols were real. And what they would do is they would give sacrifices. They would kill a bull, kill a goat, and then it will go on the altar. And the expectation was that that the sacrifice was food for Yahweh or was food for the gods. The Deuteronomy tradition says no, that's not what's going on. The person that sacrifices is the person that eats. Leviticus says the exact same thing. The person that sacrifices is the person that eats. Yahweh has commanded Aaron to eat the sacrifices that are given by the children of Israel. So by doing that, the priestly tradition basically can say, well, we're not deceiving you. Even the text says that the priest eats the sacrifices. So when you're sacrificing, you're feeding the priest. And that's a concept, if you guys didn't understand this before, that when you're talking about offerings in the church, tithes and offerings, that money, they say, oh, this money is going to God. This money is going to Yahweh. It's not going to Yahweh. It's going to fix the temple. It's going to pay the ministers. And we have to be realistic. We do have to understand a lot of people, have become kind of like separatists, and they don't want to have anything to do with temples and public buildings of worship because those have costs associated with them. You got to pay the light bill. You got to pay the property taxes. You got to pay, the water bill. You have to pay all of these bills, and you have to make sure that it's maintained. And so a lot of people are trying to get away from uh, the 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 building of altars and temples, and they're saying, okay, we're just going to do it in our houses because there's a cost associated with worship. There is a cost. So I'm not going to say, even though I don't believe in tithe, I do believe in giving donations. And because 10% is the amount that I'm accustomed to, I try to give 10% of my income. But I give it as a donation and not as a tithe. And so the purpose of that is that I understand that when there's a place of worship, they have expenses. They have to pay bills. They have to pay for the ministers. They have to pay for the musicians. I do believe that musicians and ministers should be paid for the work that they do. And why? Because I was a leader, of an assembly, and what did we do? We had to sit and we had to study for long periods of time to make sure that we had um, something to teach in the assembly. And so, if you pay a teacher to study and then teach, you should pay an elder or a minister to do the same, because that's exactly what they're doing. Except the minister would devote more time, prayerfully, would devote more time to studying. Okay, because they know that they have information that the people want to hear, and possibly that they need to hear. Okay, and they feel like this information is essential to the livelihood of the people who are listening to them. And so if you feel like the word that's being preached or the word that's being taught is essential for salvation or essential so that people can hear truth, yeah, then you should probably donate. Okay, not asking you to donate here. You don't have to donate. I donate to my own ministry. Okay. And so not that I pay myself. I was gonna make a joke, but I can't make that joke.
It's like walk the talk.
Yeah.
If you believe in the cause,
Yeah.
then
If you know that there's a cost, you should probably help with that. There are a lot of assemblies that assemble at home, and we do too. We assemble at home, but we do understand, or at least I understand, it gets kind of difficult. You want the leader to pray, you want the leader to fast, you want the leader to seek Yahweh, and there are a lot of distractions in the home. I can tell you that by experience. Okay, I have children, or I have a daughter, I have a wife. Things have to be done. Garbage has to be taken out. The bills here have to be paid. So those when you come home, there's distractions, and sometimes those things can distract you. So it's good to go to a place where the main emphasis of that place is to worship. So I do encourage, in one day, when I have saved enough money, and the ministry has saved enough money, we're going to buy a place so that we can have a place to worship. So I'm not against home worship. It just can be distracting for the leader. A lot of people are thinking about themselves. Oh yeah, I don't like, going to church, and I don't like paying tithes, and I don't like. But a lot of people forget that there are ministers who also have to be ministered to, and so that's kind of the purpose of the temple. That was my rant, but um, but there are costs associated with the temple, and so. But to say that Yahweh commanded sacrifices be made, and that to say that Yahweh eats the sacrifices, or that Yahweh receives the money, is a full-blown lie. It's a big deception. To say that it's for the work of Yahweh, I can understand that. You can kind of go there. Okay? So, but the priests around that time they lived on the superstitions. Oh, Yahweh consumed the sacrifice. Oh, I thought that was about to fall. Yahweh consumed the sacrifice. Oh, well, Yahweh eats the offerings. No.
Okay, Bella the Dragon. No, what was it Bella and yeah, Bella
Bel the Dragon. And so you don't see sacrifices in the book of Deuteronomy and in that tradition, because they specifically believed that there was no need for sacrifices. It was the Levites. Remember, this is the king of Judah who is making this declaration. He doesn't need sacrifices. He doesn't benefit from sacrifices, nor does he benefit from tithes and offerings. But he knows that they collect money. And so he says, if you're waiting on me to give you money, no. The ministry has to sustain itself. And that's the reason why we donate. That's the reason why I don't have a problem donating to ministries, okay? And so Josiah, he celebrates the Passover, and is the grandest Passover that was ever made. Let me see what else I can get out of here. I'm going back to 2 Kings and 23. But it says that the wrath of Yahweh was still on that place because they did not obey. He continues to break down altars. And it says, keep, in verse 21, the king commanded all the people, saying, keep the Passover unto Yahweh your God. Look at that phrase, Yahweh your God. You see that a lot in the book of Deuteronomy. Was let you know that this text was written around the time that that Josiah, or Deuteronomy was written around the same time as this text was written, because of the emphasis on Yahweh your God. And so when you read the book of Deuteronomy doesn't have that much um, added to it. But since we understand, for instance, Joshua was originally part of the book of Deuteronomy. It was at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, from Joshua chapter 1 to Joshua chapter, I want to say 12, and then adding on chapter 24. And so this is a Levitical text, okay? Not a Levitical text, but it's a post. Um, it's a Davidic worship after Davidic worship was instituted, and you see the emphasis on Davidic worship in the books of Kings and the books of Chronicles. Those are focused on Davidic worship, and the king that does like David is doing what's right in the eyes of Yahweh, and the king that does not do like David is doing what's wrong in the eyes of Yahweh. And so the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Judges are a part. The book of Deuteronomy and the book of Joshua are a part of a history, um, and they were all written around the same time. So either Josiah wrote it or Jeremiah wrote it. But when you look in the prophets, you can also see that emphasis on Yahweh your God. So whoever it was of the same school. They all had the same school of thought. And that's why we call it the Deuteronomy text, or we call it the Yahweh alone tradition. They had the same mindset. They were in the same school. And it's noted by Yahweh your God, the God of Israel, um, and things of that nature. And so the purpose of this study was so that you can understand that the Deuteronomy text, because I barely talk about it. Um, the Deuteronomy text gets into basically it mixes the law of Hammurabi. The law of Hammurabi was in the El tradition. So in the Book of the Covenant, you see a lot of references that are very similar and very close to the law of Hammurabi. If you haven't read the law of Hammurabi, go ahead and read it, and you'll see you put it side by side with uh, Exodus chapter 21 to 24, and you'll see that it's very very similar. But whereas whoever compiled the Torah, I believe it was Ezra, whoever compiled the Torah took things from the Deuteronomy source because they have a good sense of storytelling. And so they mixed it and put it in the different books. But there's nothing mixed in with Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy itself, except that there's an extra introduction and an extra conclusion from from Deuteronomy chapter 1 to Deuteronomy chapter 11 is an introduction, and then from Deuteronomy chapter 29 all the way to 34 is a different conclusion. But the text between between Deuteronomy chapter 12 and Deuteronomy chapter 28, those are all the reforms of Josiah. And so when you see a book called The Reforms of Josiah, you'll know what that is. Okay. And that's it. That's all I have for today. That carried me a good 50 minutes, so I'm pretty good, y'all. Any questions? Any comments?
So was Josiah as great as David? Better than David? Less than David? Was he even like David?
Um, it depends on the tradition. So I would say that the Zedekite tradition, the priestly tradition, liked him because what would he do?
Like who?
He brought the people back to Josiah. Josiah brought the people back to the temple, which means what? Oh, now you have to think about this. We are here in America, and the churches fill up like nothing, right? So most of the churches here are small groups. So you can't think of the temple worship as church services. You have to think of them as
Special events.
the inauguration of the president at the White House,
Okay.
where millions and millions of people are coming.
Like for Ramadan.
Yeah.
The Kabbalah.
So those types of services, the whole nation is coming to one place and giving their resources, their crops, their profits to one place. Whereas, in America, all Christians believe that all Christian denominations are a part of the church, but they have small buildings. So only the members of that church that come to that building are donating for that building. That's not the way it is with the temple. Okay, so you can see the Levites were happy with Josiah. The Yahweh alone tradition is happy with Josiah because he's getting all the idols out of the way. The problem is, though, is that the prophets have been prophesying before Josiah because of that idolatry, and they had been doing that for some time. So they were telling the people, don't remember the original Yahwehism was polytheistic. They believed in that there was more than one God, and sometimes they would worship more than one God. But Yahweh was the main God. And so the Yahweh alone tradition is, and the prophets are saying, do not worship these other gods. Just keep your focus on Yahweh. Worship Yahweh alone. Worship Yahweh alone. Don't worship, Baal. Don't worship El. Don't worship Ashtoreth. Don't worship all these different gods. Just worship Yahweh alone. And so they would be happy with Josiah. The Yahwehists, if there were any left, would be happy because the whole nation is being brought to the worship of Yahweh. The El tradition probably wouldn't be happy. They wouldn't think he was a good king. But the tradition that combined the Yahweh and Elohim traditions will be, because the Yahweh alone tradition, what do they say? Yahweh, your God. Yahweh, Elohecha. So they're using Yahweh and El in the same breath and phrase. And so it depends on the tradition whether he was good or bad. Uh, Andre asked, what is my take of Passover? You really wanted to go there, huh? You really wanted to go there when it comes to Passover. Recently, in my studies, I was all for Passover. Passover was great for me. It was, a good time. And then recently in my studies, and this is not within a month, this is probably within the last 6 months, I started to read on research that the Passover uh, was transmitted from an Egyptian cult, uh, Egyptian lamb cult, and Passover was their rite. Passover was their tradition, and so I'm shying away from Passover, but I do believe in the 7-day feast, of unleavened bread. Not for the unleavened bread, not for the celebration of Israel coming out of Egypt, because that's what the text talks about, that it has to do with Israel coming out of Egypt. It's not about Yahweh. It's not about Israel coming out of Egypt. It's just a time for the people to all gather together in one place and to give of their harvest. So it's a harvest festival. So I am in favor of that. But I'm not for, I moved away from Jesus is the Lamb of God a long time ago. And so that is what my take on Passover is. I'm trying to, and then in the, especially in this year, I noticed that there is a concerted effort to combine Passover and Easter. They want Passover and Easter to be around the same time.
Yeah.
And so that to me, because I remember there was the controversy this year about the Aviv. When should the Aviv be celebrated? And a lot of people were upset because the mainstream of Messianic Judaism, the mainstream of the Torah observant movement, decided to do the Passover in April instead of in March.
Did not celebrate the Passover?
The Canaanites no had no, because they didn't believe in sacrifices. So that Passover is specifically about the sacrifice.
Okay.
hmm The sacrifice of the lamb specifically.
So
Okay,
what kind of
So Moses would have brought that.
Moses would have brought that
what?
the Passover.
Passover. So what kind of festivals they celebrate? Canites. Because,
The Kenites may have celebrated the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacles
oh,
because they're harvest feast.
Mhm.
Now you got to think about that though. I'm reading um, about the Kenites now and studying up on it, and they were herdsmen. They were nomads,
Mm-hmm.
so they didn't do harvest, did they?
No, because they were moving.
So it may be that the Yahweh alone tradition established those feasts. And the reason why that might be a possibility is because Israel was in a stationary place. And they were harvesting. They were used to Baal worship and sacrificing and offering the first fruits of their. I do believe that the first fruits.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I believe in the first fruits? Because in Exodus, not in Exodus, in Genesis chapter 4, it says that Abel brought the firstlings of his flock. That word for offering is mincha, and it's a general offering. But the burnt offering, the peace offering, the trespass offering, the sin offering, and all these different drink offerings, those all belong to El. But the offering, notice that it just says offering. There's no specific offering. It's just an offering. And so the grain offering is from El worship. But the offering or just the giving of something in general is 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 significant. Also notice that Abel kept sheep and that Cain tilled the ground. So Cain gave what? He gave crops because he didn't have any animals. Abel was a herdsman. Okay. So he gave
And
he gave animals. Okay. And so but Yahweh accepted Abel's offering. Why did Yahweh accept Abel's offering? Not because it was a sacrifice, it was a blood sacrifice, but because of the attitude by which Cain presented that offering. And that part is overlooked. The attitude that Cain would have gotten. But Cain was a worshiper of Yahweh. Okay?
Moses' father-in-law was a sheep herdsman, right?
He was a sheep herdsman, yeah. He
And
was a
then
Kenite.
the one that killed one of the guys with the peg, they were
Giant.
yeah, I think they were herdsmen too
They were
because they were
herdsmen also.
nomads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So the Yahweh alone, I believe that the Yahweh alone tradition may have come up with the feasts for the simple fact that they didn't want the people of Israel sacrificing to other gods. And so it's genuine. And of course they're gonna say, well, Yahweh told to Moses because they feel like that's authoritative. Instead of saying, well, we don't want you guys sacrificing to idols. So just bring your stuff, just donate it to the service. And then the Levites were not around in the Yahweh tradition. There was no priesthood, so there was no need for donations. There was no need to pay the ministers because there were no ministers. But in the Yahweh alone tradition, they had already established the Levitical system set up by David. And so, um, back to the question of what do I think about Passover, the Yahweh alone tradition favors Passover, but I can't because of my research telling me that it was a Egyptian rite. Any other questions? Comments? Sources.
There was one that I posted on. Remember, I showed you about this
Where
man
did you
posted a
post it?
blog post on Facebook.
Posted on
Oh, okay.
on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
Huh? Oh, your phone died.
No, it's heated. So when I get home, I have to post it.
Okay.
Actually, when you get
Actually, so if we put it on here, it's not gonna be able to be seen. So yeah, because that chat kind of disappears
it
unless
comes
I
up
don't know how to work it because
when
I
that
don't really
video
work it.
comes up. It shows when you're talking the parts that they posted and which areas of you speaking.
Oh,
But
that's
it's
cool.
gonna be put in the description box.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's gonna be put in the description box.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so he says to tag him on the post, Andre.
Okay.
All right, so we will be getting that to you. Um, and that's unless anybody has any questions or comments, that's basically all I have today. I thank you all for watching again. I appreciate you guys, and we'll see what happens, right? I don't know how many people are actually watching this, but donation. Donations. So, um, we will be accepting donations pretty soon. We'll be talking about that. Actually, I'll be calling everybody right after the video is over. And so we will be accepting donations. And the link will be posted in all of our YouTube sites. Blessings to you, Brother Andre. Blessings to Brother Matthias and your assembly there. Aisha, if you're still there, blessings to you. May Yahweh bless you all. Thank you all for watching. I hope this was informative to you all. I would love to meet your assembly, Matthias. I look forward to hearing from you guys. Blessings, blessings, blessings.